When Gregor Robertson was Vancouver mayor, the price of buying a house increased by 179% in one of the most expensive markets in Canada. Why do you think someone with this track record should oversee the housing file? Is this a signal from you that you don't think housing prices should go down?
That's a question. Mark Carney promised a major shakeup with today's cabinet reveal, but all it's got us doing is shaking our heads. Trudeau-era ministers are back in roles they still aren't qualified to fill, and Carney's new housing minister might even be worse than Sean Fraser. The good news is he was actually called out on it by a reporter. Let's take a look.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Rachel Aiello, CTV News. You're 2 seats shy of 1, but should Canadians expect you to govern like you have a majority?
Thank you for the question. We ran a very clear campaign on our priorities, standing up to the U.S., getting the best possible relationship, security and economic relationship, but then at the core, building the strongest economy in the G7 economy that works for everyone. I enumerated just now some of those, what that translates into specific priorities. You'll hear more of those translations in the speech from the throne, but you will be able to guess what they are, having followed the campaign and what Canadians voted for. I'll remind, not you, you'll know this, but those watching, we received more votes than anyone else in any election. We are in a position where we have cabinet members from all the provinces. I'm very proud of that, and a cabinet member from full cabinet member from the territories. So we're governing for all Canadians, all regions, with a strong and clear mandate that came out of the election, and that's how we will govern.
Thank you.
Okay, so one of the biggest problems I have in this press conference is when Mark Carney says we have a very strong and clear mandate. No, you don't. You actually do not. A strong mandate is when you have an overwhelming number of seats in the House. That's what that means. In terms of Canada, as far as the vote result was pretty much split down the middle. That's what that means. So you actually don't have a strong mandate. You actually have an official opposition party that is the largest in the history of Canada. So what that means is that almost half the country doesn't agree with your policies and doesn't agree with your party. That is not a strong mandate. So he can go around saying that he has a strong mandate, but it doesn't actually make it so. And the most obvious evidence that he does not have a strong mandate is he doesn't have a majority government.
And so what does tangible progress look like for you when it comes to addressing cost of living concerns in this country? And will there be a barometer such as public mandate letters for Canadians to hold you accountable to?
Well, I think the way Canadians will hold account by their experience at the grocery store, when they're paying their electricity bill, when they or their children are looking for a place to live. So it will be their experiences how they will hold it. They will form those judgments, and then of course accountability comes at the ballot box. Mandate letters, cabinets, cabinet discussions, legislation, regulation. These are just steps to accomplish those ultimate goals, and it's what the experience is of Canadians, Canadian families. That's how they will judge cost of living. I will say one other thing, but there are 2 elements to cost of living. One is the actual cost of things, and the other is, are people's salaries growing? Is their take-home pay increasing? Can they find jobs readily? And those last aspects, we have to focus on those aspects as well. We can act most quickly, most immediately with the middle class tax cut, which is, as I said in my remarks, we will act by Canada Day. Parliament has to approve it. We'll have to find 2 extra votes in order to get that. But we clearly campaigned on that, and we'll put that forth. But more broadly, what we need to do is build this economy, create great jobs for Canadians. At the same time, costs are held under control. But it's really about jobs and growth in incomes that will help all Canadians get ahead.
Okay, so a couple of things there. So they're actually not going to be measuring how they're going to be doing on affordability. That's interesting, isn't it? Considering we have all kinds of stats to measure that. So that's interesting. But hey, if you're not measuring how you're going to be successful, then you can just say you're successful and say, well, there's no measurables in which you can say that we're not. So this sounds like Justin Trudeau of old. And the other thing that he was saying is, well, we're going to pass a middle class tax cut and it's going to take effect by July 1st. Well, here's the thing. If Parliament isn't going to sit until the last week of May, and the last week of May, it's not like they're going to be, dropping legislation like it's falling out of the sky. You have to get a budget across. And this tax cut is most likely going to be in this budget implementation bill. Those typically take from 6 to 8 weeks to pass. Just for everyone to actually see, the 2024 budget, that took 9 weeks. It was tabled in, I think it was April 26th, and it wasn't passed until, I think, June 14th. And these budgets, they have to go through the same life cycle as all other bills. They have to be read first, then they have to be read twice, then it goes to debate, and there's votes that happen as this goes. Then it goes to committee, then it has to be studied at committee, and then it has to come back for third reading, and then it has to go to the Senate first, second, third, and then off you go. You think you're going to have this passed in a month? Really? Pretty sure that's not going to happen. So it's not going to take effect by July 1st. Now, what he might do is make it take effect on July 1st, meaning that even if it's passed afterwards, it will be retroactive. The problem with that is now you have employers in the CRA having to retroactively fix all of that, which is an administrative nightmare. And the last thing that you need to give a government that's incompetent across the board is administrative nightmares, because they can't even administrate things when things are going smoothly, never mind when there's challenges. So yeah, good luck with that 4-month bill, Mr. Carney.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Gillian Piper with Global News. Interim NDP leader Don Davies told Global News that your government was reaching out and calling NDP individuals about trying to poach them to join your party. Are you trying to poach NDP MPs to join the Liberals?
Look, we, as I said a moment ago, we have a clear mandate. We'll work towards that clear mandate. We're always interested in working with parliamentarians from any of the opposition parties to support that mandate. Obviously, those discussions will intensify as Parliament returns in the course of the next, well, it's less than 2 weeks. So clear mandate, focus on those. Speech from the throne will be quite clear in terms of our priorities. We'll work with Parliament.
So in short, yes. yes, we have been, but we've been very unsuccessful. As you can see, there's no new members of this party, and I have not given any cabinet positions to anyone that is, new to this party that has just crossed the floor. So now any potential carrot that there is there, it's most likely gone. Otherwise, it's going to look incredibly transparent. Can you imagine? Somebody crosses the floor a week from now, and then all of a sudden Mark Carney says, oh, and by the way, we have a brand new cabinet position, Minister of Swimming Pools. Can you imagine how bad that would look? You couldn't have a more transparent political bribe than that. So I think this answers the question, at least in the short term. That's not happening. So you're not going to get any NDP people crossing the floor. Props to the NDP, by the way. I don't agree with them, and in most cases, don't agree with what they say. There have been some competent ones in committee that, when they're not rooted in their ideology, they're actually, fairly effective MPs. But then they fall into their ideology, and then, everything, turns to dust. Anyhow, I will give credit where credit is due. Kudos to none of them, or kudos to all of them, I should say. Kudos to none of them for their performance last time, but kudos to all of them for saying, no, thank you very much. So obviously there's some sort of party loyalty there, and they're pretty well much, there better be, because otherwise your party is not going to be in existence after the next election. So, Carney's on his own here. And it's funny that he says, well, we're going to be forceful and we're going to get this done quickly. Have you watched government in action?
And as a follow-up, when Gregor Robertson was Vancouver mayor, the price of buying a house increased by 179% in one of the most expensive markets in Canada. Why do you think someone with this track record should oversee the housing file? Is this a signal from you that you don't think housing prices should go down?
That's a question. Holy crap, that's a question. But it's a valid one. Gregor Robertson is the former mayor of Vancouver. 179% housing increase. That's the track record of this guy. What is it with these people in appointing people that they have no qualifications for the job? Well, you already have Mark Carney. Apparently he's qualified because he failed as the Bank of Canada governor to, lead this nation through the 2008 financial crisis, even though he says it was all him. Never mind the fact that it was the past Liberal government and the Harper government and Jim Flaherty, as acknowledged by both the Harper government and the former Liberal government. And it's just, I can't. What do you say, folks? What do you say when you're saying, okay, we need a guy. We need a guy to take over Minister of Housing. And we need this guy to work on reducing the cost of housing. I know. Let's get the guy and put him into that job that actually was responsible for increasing the price of housing in Vancouver to 179%, making it one of the most unaffordable places on the planet to live. What do you say to that? I say, ladies and gentlemen, if this is Mark Carney's, change, well, as they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
You would be very hard pressed to make that conclusion from everything I've said and what our priorities are. We have a strong view on housing, a very clear policy, a policy developed with a number of members of the team, including with Mr. Robertson, and I'm thrilled that he is in the new role because he brings the type of experience that we need to tackle some aspects of this problem. One of them is how the federal government can help get municipal costs and municipal regulation costs down and regulation out of the way so that more houses can be built. Ultimately, a housing crisis, and it is a crisis, is ultimately solved by supply. We can do things to help with affordability at the start, which is why we have the GST cut, but ultimately it's a question of supply. And as I think you know, Julie, we have very aggressive objectives on supply, the doubling of the building of supply across Canada. We're going to have to change how we build. And a lot of that expertise, it's not exclusively, but a lot of it is actually been developed in British Columbia. Minister Robertson is very familiar with it. We're going to incorporate that, but in a pan-Canadian strategy to really drive this. Thank you.
He says that all of this strategy has been developed in British Columbia, the province that has some of the highest housing costs in the world. That's the template you want to use, Mr. Carney. Well, maybe there's another reason he keeps referencing British Columbia. We all know Mr. Carney seems to have these interesting ties to China, and British Columbia is essentially the entry point where a lot of this Chinese foreign interference actually began in Canada. If you don't believe me, ask Sam Cooper, but if you're watching this channel, most of you probably do believe me. And if you haven't read Sam Cooper's book, Willful Blindness, that explains a heck of a lot of it. And if you haven't read that, I highly recommend it. But notice the snarky answer from Mr. Carney back to the reporter again. Like, well, if you've paid attention to our platform, I think you know. You know what this... That's a power move from an executive to try and intimidate and try and, shame you into backing down and saying, well, I don't even have to say it, And it's It's becoming obvious that Mr. Carney is he's not going to have a good time having these press conferences and getting these questions from journalists. That despite their network, some of these journalists are actually interested in holding these leaders to account. Never mind what actually gets printed in the mainstream media or said on these panels with David Cochrane and Rosemary Barton and company. But this is where we are. So he doesn't really have a good answer for that. And all he just says is he has the experience. He has the experience. Well, if the experience required to be housing minister is that you oversaw a 179% increase in housing costs, looks like Carney's got his guy.